The parables are odd little stories, more naughty than nice sometimes. Stories that always have a twist, a sting in every tale. But how do we hear them? One of the wonderful things about St. Mary's is that we are a congregation of people who are diverse, and we kind of rejoice in that. We are diverse in a number of ways, and those who are used to worshipping here week by week will be familiar with them. We've tried to act out of our diversity too. Members of this congregation campaigned for women to be ordained. This is a congregation which has promoted very early on the idea that men and women should be treated equally in the house of God. And now we are exploring what inclusion means for those who don't identify in binary gender definitions too. Members of this congregation have also welcomed those seeking refuge and asylum in this city, and people from here have written letters of support and spoken out against the hostile environment policy, an unjust policy created by the government. In a week in which we have seen some of the mighty cast down from their thrones, I found myself longing and hoping and praying that might be the start of seeing that policy being toppled over. People from all over the world with all kinds of backgrounds worship here too. That is part of the diversity as well. There are so many levels to the diversity. In recent years, we have, of course, become known for championing the idea that same-sex couples should be able to get married in church. And we are straight, we're gay, we're bi, we're lesbian, we're trans. And when I walk down the street next week at Pride again, I will really be proud to be doing so as one of the leaders of a rainbow congregation. We are diverse, and in so many more ways. We are single, some are married, some are single again, some are widowed. And some of us are very clever and have lots of university degrees, and some of us are very clever and don't have lots of university degrees. And you know, diverse congregations like this one just love the parable of the Good Samaritan that is the gospel reading that we have today. We can project an awful lot onto it. This parable amazes me in its genius. Every single time I read it, Jesus was such a skillful, masterful teller of stories, and he was deeply mischievous too. He manages to convey something to people in just a few words that we're still talking about 2,000 years after it was first told. But perhaps the trouble is that it is all too easy to project our own issues onto it. And the sheer genius of the parable means that many preachers, well, they realize that they're not actually going to better it with a sermon, and that's true. There's never been a sermon written about the Good Samaritan that's any better than the telling of the parable in the first place. So people start to think, well, what can I do with it? And start to retell it using the tribes of their times. And I've done it myself when I've preached on it in the past. The Good Samaritan can, of course, it could be retold by me as the story of a gay man helping a homophobic protester at Pride, or perhaps the other way around, vice versa, depending on what company you keep. Not many decades ago, I have no doubt that this story was retold along racial lines in many sermons in many UK cities, and I suspect that we might well cringe if we replayed the language of those retellings now. In Glasgow, it can be retold with a member of the Orange Order and a Roman Catholic being in the strategic positions in the stories, with Episcopalians and Methodists having the walk-on-by parts. Once you know the story, you can play around with it. You can project all your issues and predilections and prejudices onto it. Someone went down from Jericho to Jerusalem and was beset by robbers. Well, we never tell the story as though the robbers are important. But as we learn about climate change, and as we learn more about colonialism, might some of us have fresh ways of seeing ourselves in the tale. And so it goes on, different ways of telling the story, projecting different tribes, individuals, people into the characters. And whom you choose as the Good Samaritan hero, and whom you choose as the victim beaten up by the road, and whom you choose as those walk-on-by clerics, might tell you much about yourself. It might tell you something about the world in which you live too. But the thing that I want to suggest today about the parable of the Good Samaritan is that Jesus didn't actually invite us to retell it. He invites us to rehear it. The parable of the Good Samaritan is about us. And when we start to recast it as being a story about them, then maybe we've missed the point of it. One of the striking aspects of diversity, amongst many others that we have in this congregation, is diversity in terms of the number of times that people have heard these stories. Some of us have heard them preached on for years, or have been preaching on them for years. Some of us have studied them for years. Some of us have written about them for years. Some of us have been reading them in Greek for years and talking about what they really, really, really mean for years. But one of the great riches of this congregation right now is that we have some people who haven't. For there are people here who are discovering Christianity for the first time, who are discovering Christianity at the moment, and for whom, week by week, the stories that we read in the center of the church amongst the people are new and fresh and being heard for the first time. And we will get lots of parables over the summer, and I invite all those who think they've heard them so many times before to try to equip themselves with the ears of those who haven't. One of the possible interpretations of this parable is that we need to go to someone unexpected in order to hear about what God is doing. Jesus was hinting that God was with someone whom his hearers would have been completely suspicious and distrustful of, someone whom they would have presumed knew nothing about the works and deeds of God at all. For those who have heard this story so many times before, who would you ask to explain it to you in order that you might hear something new? You might like to ask someone who's just heard it afresh. It is an enormous gift to be able to hear the parables for the first time, and those who are doing so here are encountering pearls beyond price when they hear them. Someone went to Jerusalem to pray and was beset by robbers, and those who should have been expected to help him didn't. And the one whom he should have been most suspicious of did. This is a story as much about compassion as about identity markers. Have compassion. Love and be loved. Tend and be tended. Care and be cared for. For in God's time, all barriers to love will shatter and disappear. All that divides us one from another needs must melt away. All that divides us from living God's dream of loving kindness towards one another vanishes in the compassion that this story generates in its hearers. If only we can hear it for the first time.